famous polyglot told Maid's daughter to translate a rare language, unaware she's a genius linguist. The chandelier lights shimmered across a ballroom filled with the world's greatest linguists. Polished silver trays clinked, and polished egos clashed. At the center of the International Language Symposium stood a relic that silenced even the loudest voices, a cracked stone tablet with carved angular markings that defied translation. Dr. Alistair Finch, the celebrated polyglot who boasted fluency in 33 languages, adjusted his glasses and declared with performative gravitas, "No known linguistic root, possibly Proto-Iberian, perhaps ritual code. But whatever it is, no one alive can read this." Then his gaze landed on a small figure by the refreshment table, a young maid's daughter, pouring tea with careful hands. "You there?" Finch said with a smirk. "Care to try your luck, little miss? Maybe your broom knows something we don't?" A ripple of laughter rolled through the scholars, but Clara, 12 years old, didn't flinch, her eyes wide and quiet, fixed on the stone's patterns. Her lips parted slightly. She knew those shapes. She had seen them before, not in books, but in the stories whispered by her great-grandfather, Captain Samuel Miller, the war hero who used to murmur in a strange musical language under the summer stars. The crowd returned to their chatter, but Clara's heart thudded in her chest. That stone wasn't just an artifact, it was a message. By the time her mother, Helen, managed to pull her aside into the service corridor, Clara's mind was racing. "Clara, you can't—" "But, Mama," she whispered urgently, "those symbols, Grandpa used to draw them on the porch steps. They mean something." Helen sighed. "Your great-grandfather was a soldier. He saw things, heard things. Maybe it was just his stories." But in the conference hall, Professor Eleanor Vance, the only one who hadn't laughed, watched the girl's retreating figure with a spark of curiosity. Later, she found Helen in the kitchen. "Your daughter recognized that script, didn't she?" Helen froze. "Please, Professor, she's just a child." Eleanor smiled softly. A child, perhaps, but one with a memory the world may need. That night, Eleanor invited Clara to her study suite upstairs. Books lined every wall, and the tablet stood on a velvet cushion beneath warm light. Clara hesitated only a moment before stepping closer. Her fingers traced the carvings. "This isn't a code," she murmured. "It's music. The symbols rise and fall like melody. Where water sleeps, the stone dreams. That's what this line says." Eleanor's pen dropped. "That's impossible," she breathed. But Clara was already reading more, translating not just words, but meaning. The next morning, the symposium resumed under a tense hush. Dr. Finch strode to the stage with the confidence of a man who believed the world already belonged to him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "after long analysis, I've reached a preliminary translation—" "Excuse me," came a small voice. Gasps swept the hall. Clara, in her plain gray dress and scuffed shoes, stood beside Professor Vance. Helen was at the door, torn between pride and panic. Finch's brows shot up. "Is this some kind of joke?" Eleanor's voice cut through the whispers. "The girl has something to say. Let her speak." Clara stepped to the microphone. "The markings aren't ritual or proto-anything," she said softly but firmly. "They're the language of the Aleutian Highlands, the language my great-grandfather called the tongue of silent mountains." Finch scoffed. "A child's bedtime myth." Clara met his gaze. "Then explain why your translation reads, 'Sun devours the blood of kings,' when it actually means the dawn remembers its sons." The room fell utterly still. She went on, word by word, sentence by sentence, weaving the forgotten syntax into living poetry. The inscriptions weren't prophecy. They were memory, a battlefield lament, names, places, the final messages of soldiers trapped in a blizzard a century ago, her great-grandfather's unit. Eleanor wiped her eyes. Finch's papers fluttered uselessly to the floor. The story of Captain Miller had long been a military mystery. His final dispatch had vanished, his unit presumed lost to nature. Yet Clara's translation revealed what truly happened. Through metaphor, the stone spoke. Officer Peters fell where the lion of snow roared, a landslide. Corporal Chin's spirit cut by bright bubbles, artillery fire. And then the final line, the mountain hears the vow. Clara understood what it meant. Miller's vow wasn't about victory, it was about remembrance, that even if they perished, their language, their story, would endure. Reporters flooded the room. Scholars who had once sneered now jostled for notes. Finch sat silently at his desk, face pale, pride shattered. That evening, he found Clara sitting alone in the lobby, staring at the snow outside. "I was wrong," he admitted quietly, "and cruel. I thought knowledge made me superior. But you," he shook his head, "you carry something none of us can learn, inheritance of meaning." Clara looked up at him, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. "It's not mine alone," she said. "It belongs to the mountains and the people who listened." The discovery shook the academic world. News outlets hailed Clara as the girl who revived the lost tongue. A month later, the Smithsonian requested her notes. The National Archives called for collaboration. And in a gesture that made the audience rise to their feet, Professor Vance announced the creation of the Samuel Miller Foundation for Endangered Languages, with Clara as honorary junior chair. At the ceremony, Finch approached her again, handing her a small box. Inside lay a pendant, a silver mountain engraved with the symbols she'd translated. "For the real linguist," he said. Helen, tears in her eyes, hugged her daughter tight. "Your great-grandfather would be proud," she whispered. 6 months later, Washington, D.C. The National Archives' marble halls echoed with the hush of history. In a sunlit corner office, a 13-year-old girl sat at a wide oak desk covered with manuscripts, maps, and a small photograph of a man in uniform. Clara adjusted her glasses and leaned closer to a new fragment, faded ink on old paper, the same script, the same voice. She smiled faintly and began to write. Downstairs, Helen managed the Foundation's public outreach, learning to navigate the same world that once ignored her. Professor Vance, now gray-haired but radiant, often joined Clara for evening discussions. And sometimes, when the building emptied, Clara would whisper softly to the photograph, repeating the ancient words she had once heard on her grandfather's porch. Nura Silin Mehra Toshka. The silence remembers us. Outside, snow fell on the city, gentle, endless, quiet as the mountains. The Athetherton Grand Hotel stood like a monument of intellect and vanity, its ballroom transformed into a battlefield of languages. Ornate chandeliers hung from ceilings painted with scenes of Greek philosophers, their marble eyes gazing down at a crowd of modern scholars who believed themselves their equals. Waiters glided through in white gloves, refilling crystal glasses as professors debated phonetics over pâté. Among them, Dr. Alistair Finch ruled like a self-crowned emperor. Every syllable he spoke dripped with authority, Tall, well-groomed, and sharply dressed in a navy suit that seemed to hum with money, he embodied confidence, the kind that doesn't invite correction. To him, language was conquest, every tongue mastered, every dialect a trophy. He was surrounded by admirers and opportunists, young researchers hoping for a handshake that might become a citation. Yet behind the charm, his gaze was restless. He sought one thing only, eternal academic immortality. And the stone tablet, newly discovered in the frozen Aleutian highlands, was supposed to be his crown jewel. Helen Miller, meanwhile, moved through this glittering world unseen. Years of service had made her silent, precise. She polished glassware, adjusted tablecloths, and ensured the symposium ran flawlessly. But tonight, her attention was divided. Her daughter Clara had insisted on helping. Clara's presence was small yet luminous. She carried a tray of tea and sugar with careful balance, her long brown hair tied in a plain ribbon. Unlike the scholars, she noticed the small things, the rhythm of accents, the way words changed tone when mixed with wine, the nervous laughter of insecure men. She had a gift for sound. She could mimic any accent, repeat a foreign phrase perfectly after hearing it once. It was a secret game she shared only with her mother, and with her great-grandfather's memory. Every summer, before he passed, Captain Samuel Miller had sat on the porch of their small cabin, whittling wood, while Clara listened. His voice, hoarse but warm, told stories of the mountains that speak when men are silent. He would draw strange marks in the dirt, curved lines and spirals, and make her repeat them. Language, he told her, isn't made of words, it's made of breath. The moment you breathe meaning into sound, it becomes alive. When he died, those symbols became her lullaby. She drew them in notebooks, carved them into driftwood, whispered them to the wind. Now, as she looked across the hall at the old stone tablet displayed under glass, her breath caught. The markings were the same flowing strokes, the same rhythm. Her fingers trembled around the tray. "Clara," her mother murmured, noticing her frozen stance, "keep moving, sweetheart." But it was too late. The guests were watching. Finch had already noticed her stare. He smiled like a cat spotting a bird. "Ah, the help seems intrigued," he said loudly, turning the crowd's attention. "Tell us, little one, do you recognize our ancient riddle?" Clara's cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The laughter came soft at first, then louder. "Perhaps she'll tell us it's written in housekeeping code," one man snorted. "Or the language of laundry receipts," another added. Helen pulled Clara back, whispering, "Ignore them." But Clara couldn't. Beneath the ridicule something stirred, not anger, but certainty. Those scholars were wrong. The tablet wasn't meaningless. It spoke. At the edge of the crowd, Professor Eleanor Vance observed the scene. She was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled into a bun, her eyes sharp and analytical, but softened by empathy. Unlike Finch, she didn't laugh. She studied the girl's face, the stillness, the focused curiosity that didn't belong to a child pretending to know something. Later that night, long after the laughter faded and the hall emptied, Eleanor found Clara sitting in the corridor, her tray beside her. "You saw something, didn't you?" she asked gently. Clara looked up, startled. I think I heard it." "Heard?" "Yes, not with my ears, with my head. Like when you remember a song but can't say where you learned it." The professor smiled faintly. "Come with me." She led the girl to the study suite upstairs, where the tablet rested beneath lamplight. The carvings shimmered faintly under the golden glow. Eleanor offered her a chair. "Go on," she said. "Show me what you mean." Clara hesitated, glancing toward the door. "If Mama finds out, I'll take the blame," Eleanor assured. Slowly, Clara traced a line across the stone with her finger. Her lips moved silently. Then, in a low, trembling voice, she whispered a phrase in a strange, fluid rhythm, half melody, half whisper. The words rolled out like wind through pine trees. When she finished, she whispered in English, "It means, where water sleeps, the stone dreams." Eleanor's breath caught. You understood that?" Clara nodded. "It's not words, it's images. The meaning changes with rhythm. My great-grandfather used to say this was how they kept secrets during the war, not by hiding them, by singing them." Eleanor sat back, speechless. She realized the girl had done what no scholar in the room, not even Finch, could achieve. She had felt the language instead of dissecting it. Outside, snow began to fall softly over the hotel's glass roof. Inside, two generations met across time, one seeking knowledge, the other carrying it in her blood. Morning sunlight spilled through the ballroom windows, cutting sharp gold lines across the polished floors. The symposium crowd was buzzing, anticipation, rivalry, curiosity, all woven into a single hum. The topic of the day, the illusion stone tablet and its possible military origins. At the center of the room, the tablet gleamed beneath glass, surrounded by cameras and microphones. Reporters from the Times and National Geographic were already there. This was Dr. Alistair Finch's moment, his stage, his triumph. He stepped up to the podium, his smile perfectly measured, his notes arranged in military precision. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice smooth as oil, "I'm pleased to present the first credible attempt at translating the so-called Illusion inscriptions." Murmurs of admiration swept through the audience. Finch basked in it. He clicked a slide. The carvings projected on a massive screen. "After exhaustive analysis," he continued, "I have determined the text to be ceremonial, possibly a pre-Indo-European cult prayer. Roughly translated, the sun devours the blood of kings, the moon feasts on the fallen." The crowd applauded politely, though some faces were uncertain. Even Professor Eleanor Vance frowned. Something felt off. Too theatrical, too forced. From the back of the room, a small voice spoke. "That's not what it says." The sound was quiet, but it cut like glass. Heads turned, cameras swiveled. There she was, Clara Miller, standing beside her mother, near the refreshments table, hands clasped nervously in front of her dress. Helen looked like she might faint. Finch blinked in disbelief. "Excuse me." Clara swallowed, voice trembling but clear. "You said it means the sun devours the blood of kings. But it doesn't. It says, the dawn remembers its sons." A ripple of laughter moved through the scholars. Someone whispered, "The Maid's girl again?" Finch forced a patronizing smile. "How poetic. And may I ask, young lady, on what linguistic authority you base this claim?" Clara hesitated. "My great-grandfather was Captain Samuel Miller. He spoke this language. He called it the tongue of silent mountains. He taught it to me when I was little." The laughter grew louder. A few reporters chuckled outright. "Oh, marvelous! We have an inherited genius," one man joked. Finch's tone turned cold. "Captain Miller, yes, the same officer whose notes were considered incoherent ramblings. How quaint, that his descendant now seeks to lecture scholars. Helen stepped forward, whispering, "Clara, please, that's enough." But the damage was done. Clara's voice broke slightly, but she didn't back down. He wasn't mad. He was right. The language isn't a code. It's alive. Every symbol carries two meanings, sound and feeling. Finch's eyes narrowed. "Feeling?" he repeated, mocking. "Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the future of philology, emotional translation by instinct." Laughter exploded again, louder this time. Eleanor Vance rose from her seat, her expression icy. "Enough," she said. But Finch spoke over her. "Tell me, Clara," he continued, "what does this line mean then? Here." He pointed to a segment projected on the wall. "These 6 symbols, which I've identified as a funerary dedication, perhaps you can enlighten us?" Clara stepped closer, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She read the markings not as text, but as rhythm. Her lips moved soundlessly, then she whispered, "When the lion of snow roars, the brave sleep beneath his mane." Finch froze. Eleanor inhaled sharply. That would correspond to the Aleutian avalanche of 1911, she murmured. "The military expedition that vanished." But before anyone could speak further, Finch laughed harshly. "A charming bedtime tale. You see, this is the danger of folklore contaminating scholarship. The girl is reciting legend, not language." Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed. Helen pulled Clara toward the exit, but not before a man from the press shouted, "Hey, kid, can you sing the rest for us?" Laughter followed her like stones. Clara's face burned as she fled the ballroom, her small shoulders trembling. The heavy doors closed behind her, muting the mockery inside. In the hallway, Helen crouched to embrace her daughter. "It's all right, sweetheart. They don't know what they're saying." Clara shook her head. "No, Mama, he doesn't know what he's reading." Behind those doors, the academic wolves tore into Finch's so-called translation, not out of loyalty to Clara, but because doubt had been planted. Even arrogance couldn't hide the tremor in his voice when Professor Vance quietly remarked, "Her translation fits the phonetic patterns better than yours." But none of that mattered to Clara. In her chest, humiliation burned like fire. The laughter still echoed, yet beneath it, a strange calm began to form, a promise to herself. If the world refused to believe the truth, she would make it impossible to deny. That night, as snow fell softly over the city, a young girl sat by the hotel window, whispering the old words her great-grandfather had once taught her, words that would soon shake the world. That night, the snowstorm outside the hotel deepened into a white silence, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Clara couldn't sleep. The words she had spoken, the laughter, the disbelief, replayed endlessly in her mind. But beneath the sting, a quieter memory began to surface, the sound of her great-grandfather's voice. It had been a summer evening years ago, before he passed away. Fireflies danced in the garden. The porch boards creaked as Captain Samuel Miller, his once straight soldier's back, now slightly bent with age, whittled at a piece of pine wood. Clara sat cross-legged at his feet, watching the small curls of wood fall to the floor. "Do you know what language is, little bird?" he asked her. Clara shook her head. "Words?" He smiled faintly. "Not quite. Words are only shells. Language is the river that runs inside them." He drew strange symbols in the dust with the tip of his knife. Curved lines, slanted triangles, dots arranged like constellations. This is Elusian, the tongue of the Highlands. Few remember it now. It's older than maps, older than war. I learned it from a woman in the mountains when my men were starving, half buried in snow. He paused, eyes distant. She called herself Miru. She spoke with her hands, her eyes, her silence. Every sound meant something beyond meaning. It was the only thing that kept us alive when words failed. "Did you save her?" Clara asked. Miller looked away. "No, little one. She saved me." He taught Clara songs that night, low, haunting melodies that rose and fell like the wind sliding between rocks. She repeated them until her voice became part of the night air. When he grew tired, he pressed a hand to her chest. "Promise me," he whispered, "if the world forgets, you'll remember, even when no one believes you." Now, years later, that promise echoed louder than ever. In the early morning hours, Professor Eleanor Vance sat in her hotel suite, surrounded by papers, unable to sleep herself. Clara's words had shaken her. There was something authentic, something ancient in the rhythm of that girl's speech. As she flipped through her notes, she found a classified document copied from military archives. Operation Elusian, Final Dispatch, Captain S. Miller. She frowned. Half the lines were gibberish, or so everyone thought. But now, after hearing Clara's translation, the patterns made sense. Lion of snow, dawn remembers, the same metaphors. Could it be that Miller's mad final reports were not madness at all, but poetry in an unknown tongue? The next day, Eleanor sought out Helen and Clara. Helen was reluctant, but Clara, eyes still red from the humiliation, followed silently. They met in the professor's study once more. Eleanor spread the copied report across the table. "These are your great-grandfather's last transmissions. Do you recognize anything?" Clara's fingers hovered over the faded ink. She began to whisper under her breath, syllables rolling softly. Then, with growing certainty, she translated, "Supplies gone, men wounded, snow rising, but we do not despair. The mountain watches. The silence keeps our vow." Her voice trembled at the end. This isn't just a report. It's a message for home." Eleanor nodded gravely. The army thought he'd gone mad. They buried his notes. But this is the same linguistic system as the stone tablet. Clara, your great-grandfather's unit must have carved that tablet before they died. Helen covered her mouth, eyes glistening. "You mean that tablet is their memorial?" "Yes," Eleanor said softly. "And only his blood could read it." That evening, Eleanor made a decision. She would bring the girl back to the symposium stage. No one, not even Finch, could dismiss living proof. But she also wanted Clara to understand the man behind the mystery. "Your great-grandfather," she told her, as they walked through the quiet hotel corridors, "wasn't just a soldier. He was a cryptographer, part of an elite unit that intercepted enemy communications during the Illusion campaign. When they were trapped in the mountains, he used the local tongue as an unbreakable code. No one outside the tribe could read it. Even the enemy couldn't. So he turned a dying language into a shield," Clara murmured. "Yes, and in doing so, he saved hundreds, though history never gave him credit." They stopped before the grand window overlooking the snowy streets below. Clara pressed a hand against the cold glass. "He said the mountains speak when men are silent," she whispered. Eleanor smiled. Perhaps tonight they're ready to speak again. Meanwhile, in his private suite, Dr. Finch stared at the headlines already appearing online. "Maid's daughter challenges language legend. His reputation, once untouchable, was now bruised by a child's words. Anger simmered in him, not at the girl, but at the fear gnawing in his chest. What if she was right? What if he, the master of languages, had been deaf all along? He poured a glass of whiskey, his reflection fractured in the crystal. For the first time in years, he didn't see brilliance. He saw emptiness, conquest without meaning. He whispered to himself, "The dawn remembers its sons." The phrase rolled awkwardly on his tongue, but somehow it felt truer than his own translation. In her room, Clara lay awake, her mind alive with memory. She could almost see the mountains her great-grandfather described, snow piled high, voices carried by wind, men carving their final words into stone. She whispered one of his old songs, her voice barely audible. When the river sleeps, the stone dreams. When men forget, the earth remembers. And for the first time since that humiliating morning, she felt calm. The laughter of the scholars was far away now, like distant thunder. All that mattered was the rhythm of her breath, the same rhythm her great-grandfather once spoke with. Tomorrow she would show them what he meant, not through argument, but through truth. By dawn, as sunlight spilled over the city's rooftops, Clara sat at her desk in Eleanor's study, transcribing the tablet from memory. Line by line, symbol by symbol, she drew what her great-grandfather once taught her, the river of meaning that flowed beneath the stone. Each mark glowed faintly in the morning light, as if the past itself were awakening. In that moment, the forgotten and the living stood together, soldier and scholar, past and present, mountain and child, united by a language the world had abandoned, but which one brave heart refused to let die. The third day of the symposium dawned bright and brittle with cold. Snow clung to the marble steps of the Athetherton Grand as journalists gathered, sensing drama. Inside, tension thickened the air like static. Rumors had spread. The maid's daughter would speak again, and this time Professor Eleanor Vance would stand beside her. Dr. Finch paced near the stage, face tight, jaw locked. He told himself it didn't matter, that no child could undo decades of scholarship, yet his palms were sweating. Across the room, cameras clicked. The crowd was twice as large as before. At 10 o'clock sharp, the lights dimmed. Mr. Davenport, the conference chair, stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began carefully, "before Dr. Finch continues his presentation, Professor Vance has requested a brief demonstration from her young research assistant." Whispers erupted. "Assistant? Child prodigy? This is absurd." Eleanor guided Clara to the microphone. The girl looked small beneath the stage lights, a plain gray dress against a sea of tailored suits, but her gaze was steady. Her mother stood at the back, twisting her apron with trembling hands. Clara took a breath. "Yesterday, I said the tablet wasn't a code or a prayer. I stand by that. It's a memorial." Finch folded his arms, expression frozen. "The men who carved it were soldiers," Clara continued. "My great-grandfather was one of them. They used a language called illusion, spoken by the mountain people who helped them survive. When they were trapped in a storm, they carved their story into stone so the world would remember." She touched the tablet before her. "This line," she said, pointing, "was translated yesterday as 'the moon feasts on the fallen,' but that's wrong." Her voice softened, melodic. She spoke the words in illusion, fluid, almost musical. The sound filled the room, haunting and ancient. Then in English, "It says, The night carries their names, so the dawn will not forget them. A hush fell. Even the reporters lowered their cameras. Clara continued, tracing the symbols as she spoke. Every mark is both a word and a feeling. The mountains were their witness, the wind their messenger. This language wasn't meant to be studied. It was meant to be heard. Her voice grew firmer. Dr. Finch's translation made the dead sound violent, but they weren't worshiping blood or kings. They were saying goodbye. Finch opened his mouth to protest, but no sound came. Every eye in the room was on Clara, this small girl who spoke like a bridge between worlds. Eleanor stepped forward, her tone calm but commanding. To confirm her translation, I've compared her syntax to Miller's final field notes. They match perfectly, even the cadence. Ladies and gentlemen, this child just restored a lost language. A wave of silence followed, then slowly, applause. Hesitant at first, then building until the hall thundered with it. Helen wept quietly at the back, her hands pressed to her lips. Dr. Finch sat motionless, the spotlight catching the faint tremor in his jaw. For the first time, the master of 30 languages had none left to speak. Clara stepped down from the stage, heart racing, face pale but radiant. Professor Vance met her halfway, hands resting gently on her shoulders. "You did it," she whispered. Clara looked toward the window, where snowflakes drifted past the glass. "No," she said softly. "He did." And in the silent pause that followed, the echo of her great-grandfather's promise seemed to drift through the air. When the world forgets, remember. News spread faster than light. By noon, the headline, "Maid's Daughter Deciphers Lost Military Code," appeared on every major network. Crowds of journalists filled the marble lobby, demanding statements. The International Symposium, once a quiet academic event, had become the stage of a revelation. Upstairs, the ballroom had transformed from arrogance into awe. Where mockery once rang, now there was reverence. Scholars crowded around Clara's table, notebooks open, voices hushed. Professor Eleanor Vance sat beside her, gently moderating as the girl explained each linguistic nuance, rhythm-based syntax, double-meaning metaphors, memory-based phonemes. Clara didn't gloat. She simply spoke with calm clarity, as though she were merely remembering something the world had long forgotten. Every word she uttered peeled away layers of misunderstanding, and even Finch, standing in the shadows near the window, couldn't look away. He had been wrong, devastatingly wrong, and he knew it. Eleanor stood, addressing the audience. "What you've witnessed," she said, "is not just translation, it's resurrection. A language once believed extinct has been reborn through oral memory. Captain Samuel Miller's so-called nonsense dispatches were, in truth, the earliest record of the Illusion linguistic code, and this girl carries it within her blood." The room erupted in applause, but Finch didn't move. He kept his gaze fixed on the girl who had undone him, not with pride, not with arrogance, but with grace. Clara, unaware of his stare, turned to the next inscription. "This one," she said softly, tracing the symbol shaped like a curved blade, was their final message. She inhaled deeply and spoke in illusion. The syllables rose like wind through a canyon, low, haunting, beautiful. Then she translated, "We have no voice left, so we lend ours to the mountain. Let it speak when we cannot." The room was silent. Some scholars bowed their heads, others wept quietly. It was no longer about linguistics. It was about humanity, about remembrance. Later that afternoon, the press conference began. Cameras flashed. Clara stood on the same stage where she had once been mocked, this time beside Eleanor and Mr. Davenport. "Today," Davenport announced, "we acknowledge an extraordinary discovery and an extraordinary mind. In honor of Captain Samuel Miller and the preservation of dying languages, we are establishing the Samuel Miller Foundation for Endangered Tongues. Its mission, to protect languages that carry the soul of their people." Applause echoed through the hall. Clara blinked rapidly, trying not to cry. Eleanor placed a hand on her shoulder. "You'll lead it one day," the professor whispered, "and I'll be honored to work for you until then." Behind them, Helen watched, tears streaking down her cheeks. For years, she had scrubbed these floors, served these scholars, endured their dismissive glances. Now, her daughter stood where none of them could, in the light of respect. When the crowd thinned, Finch approached slowly, his usual arrogance stripped away. His voice was quiet, roughened by something rare: humility. "Clara," he said, "I owe you an apology." She turned, uncertain. He continued, "When I mocked you, it wasn't because I thought you foolish. It was because I feared you were right. For years I've collected languages like trophies, but I never listened to them. You did what I never could. You heard meaning where others only saw symbols." He extended a small velvet box. Inside lay a silver pendant in the shape of a mountain, engraved with the illusion word Sarin, remembrance. Clara smiled shyly. "Thank you, Dr. Finch." He bowed his head slightly. "No, my dear, thank you. You reminded me why words matter." That evening, the ballroom lights dimmed for the closing ceremony. Reporters, scholars, and guests gathered as the tablet was gently moved into a glass display case for public exhibition. Eleanor spoke briefly, her tone reverent. "This tablet is not a relic," she said. "It is a voice. It speaks not only for those who carved it, but for every language silenced by time. And today, that voice was heard again." She gestured to Clara. The crowd rose in applause. Helen clutched her daughter's hand as flashbulbs exploded. For a moment, Clara looked overwhelmed. But then she saw it, a faint reflection in the glass case, an old man's gentle smile behind her own face. Captain Miller's photograph hung beside the tablet, his eyes captured in black and white resolve. Clara stepped closer to the microphone. "My great-grandfather used to say," she began, "that silence is just the world waiting to remember. So, if anyone ever tells you something is gone, a language, a story, a dream, listen harder. You might still hear it." A wave of applause followed, rising like thunder and fading into the soft hum of admiration. Later that night, long after the last guests had gone, Clara wandered the empty ballroom alone. Moonlight poured through the tall windows, reflecting off the glass case that now held the illusion tablet. She approached it quietly. The inscriptions glowed faintly under the moon, as though alive. She whispered the final line again: "The mountain speaks when men are silent." Her breath fogged the glass. For a heartbeat, she could almost see figures carved in light. Soldiers standing proud in the snow, her great-grandfather among them, smiling faintly. Then the image faded, leaving only her reflection, a girl who had carried the silence of generations and turned it into song. Outside, the streets of Washington buzzed with headlines. The world had found a new kind of hero, not a billionaire or a warrior, but a child who listened. For Dr. Finch, it was the end of vanity and the beginning of humility. For Eleanor, it was the redemption of her life's work. For Helen, it was freedom from invisibility. And for Clara, it was the beginning of a legacy. The following morning, the grand ballroom looked entirely different. The banners and microphones had been cleared away, replaced by a single polished table where reporters gathered for closing interviews. The once boisterous crowd spoke in lowered voices now, the kind of hush reserved for sacred things. Dr. Alastair Finch entered quietly. No entourage, no applause. His name, once synonymous with brilliance, now carried the echo of pride undone. Yet there was no bitterness in his eyes, only exhaustion, and perhaps relief. He approached Clara, who was reviewing notes beside Professor Vance. Helen stood nearby, her hands folded like a proud sentinel. The room seemed to hold its breath. Finch cleared his throat. "Miss Miller," he said softly, "may I speak?" Clara turned, polite but guarded. "Of course, Dr. Finch." He paused. "Yesterday I lost more than a theory. I lost the illusion that knowledge makes a man wise. You showed me that truth doesn't belong to rank or title. It belongs to those who listen." He stepped aside and gestured toward the reporters. "I've asked them here because there's something I must say publicly." The cameras rolled. Finch faced them squarely, his voice steady, though his hands trembled slightly. "For years, I've claimed mastery of tongues, but yesterday a child taught me the one thing I'd forgotten: humility. My translation was wrong. My arrogance blinded me. The true discoverer of the illusion language is Miss Clara Miller." A ripple ran through the room. Flashes, murmurs, then applause. But Finch wasn't finished. "I will withdraw my name from any credit related to this discovery," he continued. "Instead, I will serve on the Samuel Miller Foundation as a field researcher, under Professor Vance's and Miss Miller's guidance, if they'll have me." Gasps rose from the crowd. The mighty scholar offering to work under a maid's daughter. It was unthinkable, and yet somehow it felt right. Clara looked at him for a long moment, then smiled softly. "Dr. Finch," she said, "you don't have to serve under me. You can serve with me." His composure broke for the first time. A small, grateful laugh. "You're far wiser than I deserve." Professor Vance nodded approvingly. "Then it's settled," she said. "Let's build something worthy of the voices that came before us." Finch turned to leave, shoulders lighter than they had been in years. The press clamored for more questions, but Clara only stood quietly, watching him go. No triumph in her face, only calm understanding. Because true victory, she realized, isn't in making others bow. It's in helping them stand again. 6 months later, the snow had melted from the rooftops of Washington, D.C., leaving the city bathed in spring light. The National Archives stood tall under the morning sun, its marble steps gleaming, its flag fluttering above crowds of visitors. Inside, behind a glass panel etched with the words, "The Samuel Miller Foundation for Endangered Tongues," a new office had been added. Small, warm, filled with books and the scent of paper and ink. At the center sat Clara Miller, now 13, her dark hair tied neatly, her eyes full of quiet purpose. The desk before her was stacked with letters from universities, field linguists, and small indigenous communities around the world, all asking for her help. She picked up one envelope marked Tibetan Highlands. Urgent translation needed. Smiling, she began to read. Words still thrilled her, but not for what they proved, only for what they connected. Outside her door, Professor Vance was speaking with Dr. Finch, now humbler, glasses slightly crooked, a notebook in hand. They were laughing about something, the tension of the past long dissolved. Occasionally, Finch would glance into Clara's office and shake his head with a half-smile, muttering, "A child taught me the oldest language of all, silence." Helen arrived a few minutes later, carrying lunch. She had left behind her life as a maid to work full-time for the foundation as coordinator, her posture taller, her eyes bright with pride. "Busy again, sweetheart?" she teased. Clara grinned. "Languages don't sleep, Mama." Helen placed a small framed photograph on her daughter's desk. Captain Miller in uniform, smiling faintly. Below it, in elegant calligraphy, were the words he once told her, "When the world forgets, remember." Clara touched the frame gently. "I am remembering," she whispered. That evening, when the building emptied and the city lights flickered on, Clara stood alone in the archive hall. The illusion tablet rested in its display case at the far end, bathed in soft golden light. She approached quietly, fingertips brushing the cool glass. The markings shimmered faintly as if responding to her presence. "I kept the promise," she murmured. "They all remember now." For a moment she thought she heard something, not words exactly, but rhythm, breath, a distant echo carried on air. The same melody her great-grandfather had once hummed beneath the stars. She smiled. Then, turning toward the great stone pillars of the building, she walked slowly into the night. The air smelled of rain and spring. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, low, steady, like a heartbeat. Above her, the clouds broke just enough to reveal a single star. It flickered once, faint but certain, like a voice calling across time, and Clara whispered back, "I hear you."